Yeah, I don't think Mother knew about this.
Uncle Marvin was strangled by his own beard.
Yep, you never saw it coming.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, today we're going to talk to a guy who specializes in understanding coal mining accidents. I don't know about you, but I've done a lot of work with other people, and there always seems to be a coal mining disaster in there somewhere. Someone who's died as a result of a collapse or an explosion or some sort of thing. You're not going to believe some of the stuff Stu Richards has to tell us a little bit later on about coal mining accidents and how common they are and what causes them, and some of the ethics and problems dealing with companies that coal mine over the years. He's got a lot to say. Plus, we're going to talk to Adrienne Abiodun from our friends over at Legacy Tree Genealogist, one of our great sponsors, talking about African American DNA, how it is changing research, and Juneteenth. She's got a lot to share with us as well. And right now, it's time to head out to Scotland to speak to our good friend David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and American Ancestors.org. Hello, David.
And how are you, my friend, across the pond?
I am well. What are you doing over there?
Well, NEHS leads a research tour there. Not every year, but every few years we go back to Scotland. So we're in Edinburgh, and we're researching at Scotland's people, the Record Centre of Scotland nearby, and taking in all the sights and sounds. And I've even tagged on a couple extra days for myself, including walks in the old tunnels and crypts underneath the city, under the bridges, ghost tales, cemetery walking tours at night. I'm going to go up to Loch Ness and take a cruise on Loch Ness and see if I see Nessie there. So I'll be reporting live if I do with a video.
And can you drop in on my ancestor, Robert the Bruce? He's a proven guy. He's got to be there somewhere.
Well, he's at Dunfermline Abbey the last time I checked, which is one of the places I plan on visiting.
All right.
And then I'm going to head over to England and to the border, and I'm going to check out Hadrian's Wall and some old Roman forts.
Oh.
Figured there's some ancestral footprints on there I might be able to step back into.
Nice.
Long ago.
I am so jealous. Well, let's get on with our Family Histoire news. David, where do you want to start?
Well, I want to start with a funny story that people ran, and it's about Chrissy Teigen, who's an American model, of course, influencer on social media, and a cookbook author. She found out after doing her 23andMe test that she had a twin. So she paid for some upgrades and found out what part Neanderthal she was. But the identical twin thing threw her for a loop. She even called up her dad, said, "Dad, you were there. Were there two of us?" And obviously he said no. But then it dawned on her, Fish, that she had done a DNA test a while back and did it as anonymous. Her identical twin is herself.
I love that.
Oh, that's great. But you know what? I hate to say it. There's probably one or two listeners out in our audience that said, "Oh, wait a second. That's me."
Yeah, it happens. That's true.
I'd love to hear from our listeners who actually had that happen now.
Right.
Well, the next story actually comes from your home state of Connecticut, where a history teacher decided, where he lived in Guilford, to look into some local history. Now, he knew about his own English and Scottish and Irish immigrants, and he knew about the Native American Nipmuc people that preceded them, but he didn't know a lot on the African American story. Well, this project spiraled out, and it has gone so far now that it has affected 12,000 middle school and high school students in 45 communities across 5 states, where these students restored the history and the story of over 125 individuals.
Yes.
These are amazing stories, amazing work, and I tip my hat to him because this is an important piece of American history. And thank you, Dennis Culleton, for your article and being the executive director of Witness Stones Project. And that's what he's working on.
And they're putting these stones basically in different places to mark the houses where slaves had lived back in the day and places where they worked as well. So you can see that history all around you.
Well, I think this is appropriate because Monday will be Juneteenth.
Yeah, amazing stuff.
Well, I always get excited when people dig things up, may even be your ancestor in upstate New York.
Yes.
But this case, this is looking for something I hope that remained buried. This is the DNA of the bacteria that cause various plagues through Europe. The oldest portion of detectable plague dates back, Fish, ready for this? 4,000 years ago to the Neolithic times. I always thought it was something in the Middle Ages.
And they found this stuff, and now they've connected it to these plagues, various plagues throughout the generations.
And what they're basically doing, Fish, is they're taking the old teeth from these individual burials and drilling into them, and the dental pulp inside actually contains the infectious disease to some degree.
Wow.
Well, I think all of the stories we have touch our listeners. Something may hit home. BuzzFeed put out a recent article. I'm not going to name all of them because it take the whole episode, but 26 secrets that families have found kept from other members of the family really range from being very heartbreaking to extremely dark.
Yeah.
One of the stories started off with someone who was 21 years old, wanted to volunteer as a missionary with their local church, and they required to get medical history on both sides of the family. And, well, he asked his parents, and they like, yeah, we'll get back to you. Well, later on, he got a page to report back home and to find out that the woman that he believed was his older sister was actually his biological mother.
Yeah. And that's one of just 26. So if you do a Google search of BuzzFeed 26 secrets, it'll pull it right up. And these stories are terrific.
Well, that's all I have from Edinburgh today. And don't forget, if you're not an American Ancestors member, you can join for $20 off if you use the coupon code EXTREME on AmericanAncestors.org.
All right, David, thank you so much. Of course, we got more questions to answer at the back end of the show. And coming up next, if you have a coal miner back there, you're going to want to hear the stories that Stu Richards has to explain to you about all the dangers that have been involved for your ancestors and what may have led to their deaths when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Are you stuck in your genealogy research, frustrated by those brick walls that just won't budge, or confused by DNA test results and don't know where to begin? The experts at Legacy Tree Genealogists are here to help you find your missing ancestors and complete your family tree. With over 18 years of experience, Legacy Tree has assisted clients in every state and nearly every country worldwide. We have a vast network of on-site researchers, so no matter where your roots lie, we can work to uncover the answers you seek. Picture the thrill of making that long-awaited connection, finally discovering the missing link to your relatives. That's the joy Legacy Tree brings to countless clients just like you. Whether you're a beginning or seasoned researcher, brick walls happen. But with Legacy Tree by your side, that aha moment is within reach. Visit LegacyTree.com to learn more about how to work with Legacy Tree Genealogists. Put your family history in our hands, and together we'll unlock the stories of your past. Get started today at LegacyTree.com.
Hi, Genies. Fisher here, and I hear from so many of you all the time that I love all those family stories on Extreme Genes. Where can I find ancestor stories like those? The best answer? Digitized newspapers. And nobody has more digitized newspaper pages than newspapers.com. Newspapers.com has well over 800 million searchable pages from the United States and countries all over the world. Find those valuable obituaries and marriage accounts, often with photographs. Read your ancestors' funny stories, sad stories, and sometimes shocking stories. It was from newspapers.com that I learned about how my grandfather rescued a boy from a flooded lake during World War II. In another account, I learned that my wife's ancestor ran off with the wife of a farmhand and stole over $20,000 in the process. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com. Hey, Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Hey, welcome back to Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. You know, over the course of decades of researching and writing, I've discovered so many different people and so many different friends who have family lines that include coal miners. And so many of these people have wound up dying in the coal mines. I thought I'd talk to an expert in this whole area, Stu Richards. He's the author of a book called Death in the Mines, basically centered around Pennsylvania mining, because this is where Stu's relatives are from. Welcome to Extreme Genes, Stu. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, you were not a coal miner yourself, but you said you have relatives who were.
My entire family on my paternal side were coal miners. And my life as a kid took place all around that type of talk with my grandmother, and my grandfather was killed in the mines, and his brother too, which would have been my uncle back in 1940s. They were in mining accidents. For me, I used to go all around with my uncles, and they would take me down in old mines and talk about that. Every Sunday, we'd go visit different parts of my family, and that was what the main subject was always about.
Fascinating.
Who worked in the mines and how they worked in the mines. It's a point now as a writer and trying to do this type of history. One of the best things I had as a reference was my grandmother. Mm-hmm. All she wanted to talk about was that stuff. And as a kid, what did I want to do? I wanted to go play football, go play baseball. I didn't want to hear this stuff. And now I could kick myself for that. But
well, we all go through that, right? Where we wish we had asked this, we wish we had asked that. But as you look back on it, I mean, was the conversation negative or positive? I mean, so many people died in the mines. There's the black lung disease and all that. How did they feel about it? Obviously, they're taking you down in the mines for tours. They must have thought you'd be interested.
Yeah. Well, it's a sad, sad occupation, if you want to put it that way. These people suffered immensely. Before my grandfather was killed, he was 52 years old. I unfortunately never met him, but my dad and my grandmam told me that he could hardly walk up 2 flights of steps without stopping to breathe. And after he was dead, my grandmother tried to collect and get what was called a silicosis or black lung benefits from the state. And she couldn't get them for reasons of which we don't know, but we had to get a congressman to try and get it for her. And they finally did when she was like 75 years old, you know, and it amounted to about $30 a month benefit for that. That is one of the big reasons that coal mining has been such a problematic thing. I mean, the anthracite coal region where I live, it runs from Scranton in the northeast to about 120 miles southwest to what we call Dauphin County. It's about 60 miles wide and 120 miles long. That's the actual anthracite coal region in Pennsylvania, the hard coal region. Between 1870 and the present day, they have kept mining records. Now, we've been mining here since 1840. So from 40 to 70, they never kept any records, actual records. But between 1870 and the present day, in that small corridor of the anthracite coal region, 35,162 men and boys were killed in mining accidents.
Oh, my gosh. 35,000?
So, yep. That would include inside the mine and outside the mine, what we call the whole colliery. That's what it's called, the whole working aspect.
Insane. And did that include the black lung disease?
No, that doesn't even include the black lung. That's its own separate.
So these were just mining accidents you're talking about here. And are there records that exist for the public that people could look at these things?
Yes, there's one online where you can go look for anthracite coal mining accidents if you Google something like that, and it will show all the record books. Now, the record books go from 1870, as I said, all the way up to about 1960. Then they sort of stopped it and put it more on a computer type of environment. But the best books are the ones from 1870 through the early 30s and stuff like that, because they are totally detailed into what happened.
So what was the usual cause of a coal mine disaster? I mean, there's dust explosions. I'm aware of that. There must be collapses, of course, people getting trapped. Or what was the most common?
The main accidents that you would have happen would have been gas explosions, roof falls, water. Water is a big one because water will accumulate in the mine. And there's like mule kicks, kicks from mules back in the old days.
Wow.
That's what my new book is going to be about mules in the mines, because it's totally interesting how they operated with that. But mostly roof falls, collapses of water. The biggest accident that we had happen in Pennsylvania was called Avondale, and this was back in the 1860s. What happened here was every mine today has to have 2 entrances and 2 exits. Well, back then they had 1 entrance and 1 exit in the same port. So what happened was the tunnels and the shafts caught fire, burned all the way down into the mine. Now there was like 100 and some guys down there couldn't get out and suffocated and were burned. That was the beginning of when they needed to have the 2 entrances and 2 exits so you could get in and out of a mine.
Sure. Yeah. So these records that you're talking about, did they mention the names of all those who died? Is this a database?
Yep. When I worked at the Historical Society, I used to do a lot of research for people. If they knew the time and the period where their relative worked, well, we could easily find it. It will have everything there about what caused their accident, like a fall of the roof, a car fell off the track, like you were telling me before, and things like that. It'll have all of that listed in there. The sad parts about that, back in those days, you worked for the company. Mm-hmm. The company that these fellas worked for back in the day was the Philadelphia Reading Coal and Iron Company. And it was horrible. That's when they started the union. It was called the Working Man's Benevolent Association in 1876. That was started. What they asked for was a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Yeah. And the company messed them over with that and wouldn't give it to them. And then that goes all the way into another thing about the ethnicity of the areas. Did you ever hear of the Molly Maguires?
I've heard the term. Yeah. Tell me about that.
That's an Irish group of miners that worked in the anthracite regions here. And in the 1870s, they rebelled a lot. Not only the Irish, my family were all Welsh. They came from Wales early on back in the 1870s to work in the mines here. And they were trying to fight the owners of the company. The big thing was the company store. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term.
I owe my soul to the company store. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, 16-ton, what do you get?
Yeah.
Right? In that aspect of it, you worked for the company. You lived in a company home. This always was a main interest to me, was if you were a miner and you had, say, 3 children, if 3 of those children were women, girls, and you got hurt, they kicked you right out of your house. That was it. So if you had 2 sons, that's fine, because they could still keep working and still pay for the rent. But with the aspect of working for the company like that, you went to a company doctor. You bought all your tools that you needed to mine from the company. Then on top of that, if you got hurt or anything like that, it would be possible, if you weren't hurt that bad, they would put you back to where the young men were, the young boys, the 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds, in what they call the breaker. Oh. They would be the breaker boys. It's an old term in the anthracite region called once a man, twice a boy, which means I was once a man, then I got hurt, and then I went back with the boys again, the young boys working in the breaker. So that's the big problem with the company store. They were totally fighting against that. Back to the Molly Maguires, they would burn these company stores. They would burn breakers. Some of these guys who were the Molly Maguires were not totally doing this for the benefit of the other miners. There was a lot of vendettas and stuff like that happen. Well, on June 21st, this Midsummer's Eve there, they hanged 11 of them in Schuylkill County here. And they were hanged for different murders, like murdering a coal mine boss and things like that. But that's a big part of the history here in Schuylkill County.
Wow.
Pretty interesting.
Yes. Stu, tell me then, I mean, you just talked about a region here that's not very wide. What is it, 100 miles along?
About 120 miles long, 60 miles wide.
All right. So, and you lost 35,000 people in there. There must be other coal mining areas throughout the country that has similar kind of numbers.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never done any research for the bituminous fields out west, like Pittsburgh area and down into West Virginia and Kentucky, That's where we always see those type of miners and stuff like that. I always show them on TV and, it blows your mind when I take people down in the mine and tell them that. They look at me like, are you crazy? And you got to think, too, of this. Between that time period, say 1917 was the peak of coal mining in the anthracite region. There were over 10,000 underground mines working in that small area. Today, there are six underground mines, and they're all independent coal miners, not unionized fellows, and they're all working with their families. So you might have one mine that's employing 7 people, where back in the 1900s back there that, you had 200, 300 miners down in the ground working. Politics has killed mining, for one thing.
Sure. Unbelievable.
Everything around here now is surface mining, what they call strip mining, taking it down from the surface.
He's Stu Richards. He's the author of the book Death in the Mines. You can find it all over the place, Amazon.com. And Stu, this has been a real education. Now I'm getting an idea of why I keep running into coal miners dying in people's family history. It happens all the time.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy talking about it. Keep it alive.
Absolutely. And coming up next, we're going to talk to Adrian Abiodun from our sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogists, talking about Juneteenth and DNA research for African-American families and how it's affecting them. Coming up in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Back on the job on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show on ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And my next guest comes from our sponsors over at Legacy Tree Genealogists. It's Adrian Abiodun. And Adrian, we haven't had you on the show in a while. It's great to talk to you again.
It's really great to be here, Scott. Thank you so much for having me again. It's been too long.
Adrian is a specialist in DNA and African-American research, being largely African-American herself. And with Juneteenth weekend at hand, it's great to talk to you about DNA and how it's affecting African-American research these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So tell me about this, because historically, and I remember back when DNA started becoming a big thing in the early 20-teens, there were a lot in the African-American community that were really hesitant to do DNA testing. Obviously, for reasons of, what might the government do with things like this? Do you still find that attitude is prevalent, or are more people getting comfortable with it and starting to dig in and seeing what they can do with it to help extend their lines and learn about their history?
Well, I think that attitude is still there. People who were skeptical are always going to be skeptical, or just really want to wait and give it some time to see what happens ethics-wise with this, what organizations, who's going to have access to it, who can't have access to it. I mean, historically, African-American people have not the best rapport with government agencies at time. There's a lot of distrust, just skepticism in the sense of how can this be used against us. So people have really just wanted to see how, there's a lot of good that comes from DNA, but what could happen in the negative sense? What could be bad that could happen to them? But there are people who have moved along since. I mean, this autosomal DNA testing for family research came out in 2011, which is when it was most popularized by Ancestry DNA and 23andMe and so forth. And you do have a lot of people who have come along since then, didn't test right away, but maybe have developed a sense of comfort or feeling, okay, it can't do too much to harm. It hasn't harmed all those other people, so I might as well go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, right. The guinea pigs have not been abused. That's good to know. Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that then. As the database of African Americans grows, right, on Ancestry, 23andMe, and elsewhere, what are people learning that they weren't able to find out about before?
African American history is I love it. I love the history. I love how the science has really come along and what it can do. And like I said, I think this is the best gift for African American family researchers who are really trying to piece together their families. For instance, an example would be you have families in Chicago, Black families that maybe have been there for 2 to 3 generations. And you could ask a young African-American person, where's your family from? And they'll say Chicago. Well, me as a researcher, I'm thinking, Chicago is really just Mississippi. Right. African-American people through various migrational patterns were brought in as enslaved people, possibly. Some of them may have been free people of color, but then they started off on the eastern U.S., moved into the deep South, and then branched out through these migrations out of the South to escape things like Jim Crow laws that were put in place and so forth. And so you have a lot of people in these major cities that are not connected to their ancestors just 2-3 generations ago, and they really don't know where to look. So things like Ancestry DNA communities, they recently had an update that is just phenomenal for African Americans. And if you're one of those people I don't really know much about my family, where they came from in the South, this recent update really, it zoomed in on a community that I'm aware of through, just a lot of years of research. But for someone who does not have that information and they look and they say, what is this inland Mississippi African Americans DNA community? Why do I match thousands of people that come from that? Maybe I have a connection to that community. Maybe that's where I need to be looking to do some research.
Sure. And the great thing, too, also, is this DNA came along really at about the same time that digitized newspapers started flooding us with stories and the like. So you can really look up things now and get some stories about people that you wouldn't have been able to do in the past.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many advances and they keep coming. I tell people it's still a lot of patience involved in this. Even though DNA has done a lot and you're hearing a lot of people make incredible breakthroughs, there's a lot of patience because within African American DNA results in those match list of relatives you do and do not know, but most of the ones you don't know, I tell people it's kind of like the blind leading the blind. You're relying on people and their genealogies to, again, develop leads to kind of help you extend your family tree, connect with families, maybe find a recent family member. But if you're coming from a community of people where their families have been severely severed because of the institution of enslavement, because people were fleeing communities and moving to bigger cities, you're going to have a lot of people who don't know. They just don't know. I don't know who my grandparents are. I don't know who my great-grandparents are. So you're going to find sometimes that the family trees aren't well developed, or there might be some inconsistencies. And again, just a lot of patience involved in the process. Now, if you're my DNA match, you have the jackpot.
Yeah. Right.
My tree is as far out as I've been able to take it. So.
Are you starting to see more and more people using DNA to identify their origins in Africa?
Well, I think as Black Americans, that's always the first reason that they take DNA tests. I mean, that's one of the primary reasons. The ethnicity and, ancestry compositions that the companies provide is always why did you do this? Well, I wanted to see how much Nigerian I am, how much of a particular, country it is. It could be European. African-American people have been curious about their European origins as well. So it's usually their ethnicity estimates that get them in the door. And then they don't realize, though, that there's going to be all these DNA matches if they opt into that part of it. And that that is really where you can make some strides in your research.
Yeah, the DNA matching is the thing. And I tell people all the time, really, the major companies have marketed DNA as being the way to find out whether you wear kilts or lederhosen or whatever it is. And really, from the standpoint of developing your family history and your genealogy, that's not necessarily the greatest help you're going to get. It's going to be through DNA matching. And so I always encourage people, go to that middle section on your DNA summary page. That's where all the gold is lying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think 3 reasons African-American people will take a DNA test, I think, are for the ethnicity, connecting with a particular country of origin. Then for the genealogists, the family researchers who have kind of, an idea of how this works, there are those that will take it exclusively for the matching, They've heard people make success with that. And that's where I tell people I've connected with a couple of African DNA matches. And when I mean by that, these are individuals where all 4 of their grandparents were born in Africa, and so they have nothing but recent African ancestry. I use those people as my compass, and also to verify that what's being reported by the companies in my ethnicity and ancestry composition is accurate. If I'm finding a lot of Nigerian DNA matches and it says I'm 23% Nigerian, that seems to add up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just another puzzle piece, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the whole thing. And that's the joy of doing DNA matching. I just think of it as a big puzzle where you kind of start in the middle instead of on the edges, and you just keep building out. And there are no edges. It's just, it goes on forever in every direction as you can. It's just such great fun. And what a great gift that would be for Juneteenth, right? For somebody to do a DNA kit and find out a little bit more about their ancestry.
Yeah. The beautiful thing about it, too, is it coincides with Father's Day. So the tests are usually always on sale. So now is a great time to get a deal on a DNA test.
She's Adrienne Abiodun. She's with Legacy Tree Genealogists, our great sponsor. And Adrienne, thanks so much for your time. Fascinating conversation as always. And we'll talk to you again down the line.
Thank you, Scott.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert returns as we go through another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hi, Genies. Fisher here, and I hear from so many of you all the time that I love all those family stories on Extreme Genes. Where can I find ancestor stories like those? The best answer? Digitized newspapers. And nobody has more digitized newspaper pages than newspapers.com. Newspapers.com has well over 800 million searchable pages from the United States and countries all over the world. Find those valuable obituaries and marriage accounts, often with photographs. Read your ancestors' funny stories, sad stories, and sometimes shocking stories. It was from newspapers.com that I learned about how my grandfather rescued a boy from a flooded lake during World War II. In another account, I learned that my wife's ancestor ran off with the wife of a farmhand and stole over $20,000 in the process. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com.
Are you stuck in your genealogy research, frustrated by those brick walls that just won't budge, or confused by DNA test results and don't know where to begin? The experts at Legacy Tree Genealogists are here to help you find your missing ancestors and complete your family tree. With over 18 years of experience, Legacy Tree has assisted clients in every state and nearly every country worldwide. We have a vast network of on-site researchers, so no matter where your roots lie, we can work to uncover the answers you seek. Picture the thrill of making that long-awaited connection, finally discovering the missing link to your relatives. That's the joy Legacy Tree brings to countless clients just like you. Whether you're a beginning or seasoned researcher, brick walls happen. But with Legacy Tree by your side, that aha moment is within reach. Visit legacytree.com to learn more about how to work with Legacy Tree Genealogists. Put your family history in our hands, and together we'll unlock the stories of your past. Get started today at legacytree.com.
Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. All right, time for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, David Allen Lambert over in Scotland today to answer questions. And Dave, our first question comes from Dan in South Dakota. And he says, "Hey, Dave and Fisher, I have found some historical pictures of my grandparents in a book, and I'd like to copy them, but don't want to create a copyright problem. What should I do?" Great question, Dan. And, here's the thing that I think most of us deal with, Dave, in trying to figure these things out. When do things in copyright drop into public domain? And the answer to that is after 95 years. And we had a long period of time starting in 1978 where the government actually put a freeze on this thing. And it went on for a long, long time where nothing was changing. It was like, 1923, 1924 was the latest time that things were in public domain, because anything after that remained in copyright. And a lot of this had to do with the Disney company.
Exactly. I was just going to say, you can blame this on Walt Disney and Mickey Mouse because of the incorporation. In fact, actually, I went to an exhibit recently in Philadelphia, and Disney is already 100 years old, even though Mickey Mouse isn't quite 100 years old yet. Because it was Oswald, which was another character that they had before Mickey Mouse. It was a short-lived character. There was also a character who was actually superimposed from a movie onto a cartoon back in the day, too, and back in the 20s. So, yeah, Mickey Mouse might be in public domain before you know it.
Yeah, actually, right now we're up to 1927, and I want to say Steamboat Willie came in around 28, so pretty
exactly
soon.
When it came in.
Yeah, so pretty soon people are going to be able to use Mickey Mouse from that era in whatever they want to do. But when you find your family members in a historical publication such as you're describing, just because they're your relatives doesn't mean you have the right to reproduce it. And so if this does not fit into the period of 1927 or earlier, the rule now is 95 years. Next year it'll be 1928, the year after 29, the year after that will go to 1930. If your people are not in that time period where it's public domain, then you're going to have to get some permissions from somebody. And that may require a little research into where the people who put the book together got the picture in the first place, because they undoubtedly needed to get copyright permission as well just to put it in their publication.
That's very true. In fact, at NEHGS, what we've been doing to make life easier for our members is a collaboration with digitization with Ancestry. So we're taking many of the books, unless they're very most often used, and putting a digital link that will ultimately be on our catalog and taking the book off the shelf. And in some cases, we're putting it in storage. We're not getting rid of it altogether. But there's also an exception to this. If somebody wrote a book in the 40s or the 50s, and they never put a copyright notice in the book, technically you can actually reproduce it.
Really?
Yeah, so we're finding that you can actually digitize. There's a rule, Ancestry discovered all this for us, that you can actually take and reproduce it, but you're not reprinting it. It's like a fair use type of thing, like where you can download the book to look at it or view it online. That's also true with like Hattie Trust and archive.org. There are some of them that you can log in to download for a short amount of time, the things that are more recent. So You might have a book that you can contact the author too.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's something recent, I always say recent authors put in email addresses and mailing addresses and sometimes phone numbers. And you can Google the author and see if they're out there. I mean, you're a genealogist, find a living like you do the dead and see if they're around. Because I'm sure that they got the picture from somebody else if they don't own it themselves. And, genealogists love to share.
Exactly. Good stuff. All right. Great question. And an interesting one, I think, that impacts a lot of people. Thanks so much for it. We got another question coming up next when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, final question time as we continue with Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. And David, our next question is from Deanne in Portland, Oregon. She writes, guys, I have been researching some colonial wills and also English and Scottish wills. I know what pennies and half pennies are, but what are florins, crowns, sovereigns, demis, nobles, etc.? Good question. I don't know that stuff. Do you?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I had to look it up, so thank you for sending me the question beforehand because I wouldn't know it off the top of my head either. First off, the most common one's a penny. And, of course, we still use that denomination here in America. In fact, we used to do half pennies, coins from the early 19th century and 18th century for half pennies occasionally. Now, one that you may not know, you probably have seen, is a farthing. A farthing is basically worth a quarter of a penny.
Oh.
So 2 farthings is really worth a half penny. 4 farthings equal a penny. So if you think of a penny not being worth much, a farthing was not worth a lot at all. But probably was a day's pay at some point in time in the 13th century.
Sure.
3 pence is just like it sounds, 3 pennies. A florin was worth 2 shillings, and the florins were around right through the 1940s, actually.
Really? So these were used in England, colonial America, where?
Well, in England, in some cases, colonial America as well, when the legal tender over here. In fact, some cases after the Revolutionary War, British currency was still passable. Sometimes they called it old tenor or new tenor based on the value. You see that occasionally in probates. In regards to money that's specifically Scottish, one of them you may have heard of, or maybe not, is called a lion. And of course, a lion is on the flag of Scotland. It changed over time, but it was worth about 5 shillings.
Okay.
Then a half guinea is 10 shillings or 6 pennies. You might find something called a demi. Those were only used in the 1400s. So somebody's got a hold of a really old will. This is 1406 to 1437. That was worth 9 shillings at that point in time.
Okay.
There's also a demi-lion,
Really?
which was 2 shillings, 6 pence. There's a bobby, a BAWBEE. That was worth 6 pence, and that was used roughly from the 1530s to the end of the 17th century.
Wow. Some of these terms I've never heard before in my life. And it's funny because you think, okay, if they're using that in a will, it sounds like they're leaving certain amounts to certain people. It doesn't sound like much, any of it.
Well, I hope that if my ancestors were wealthy enough in Scotland, they may have left unicorns. It doesn't mean they're leaving somebody a unicorn. From the 15th century to the early 16th century, a unicorn was made out of gold and was worth about 18 shillings. From the 1500s, it was worth 20 shillings, and by the time they stopped using it at the end of the 1560s, it was worth 22 shillings, but made of gold. And I'm sure if you find one with a metal detector, you're going to make front page news.
Yeah, they're probably worth a little bit more now than they were back then. Any others?
Well, let's see. $1. You've heard of that, right?
Yeah.
That was made out of silver and for use with trade in the East. But of course, we use the idea of an American dollar after the Spanish coin, because if you ever look on the back of an old Spanish coin, it has 2 columns. And with the wreath around it, I'm probably calling it the wrong thing. You put it together, it looks like the S and a dollar.
Oh, that's where that came from. Who knew?
Yeah, the dollar symbol. Yeah, exactly. And remember, another great place to find this type of value is our friendly neighborhood Wikipedia.
There you go. I'm sure they cover that too. Dave, thanks so much. Have a great trip in Scotland, and we look forward to talking to you again when you get back in a couple of weeks.
I look forward to it, too. Hopefully Nessie won't find me on my trip across Loch Ness.
There you go. All right. And thanks to you for joining us this week. Thanks to Stu Richards for coming on and talking about coal mining disasters and accidents. And to Adrienne Abiodun from our friends at Legacy Tree Genealogist for talking about Juneteenth and how DNA has affected African-American research. Hey, if you missed any of the show, catch the podcast. It's on Apple Media, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, TuneIn Radio, and Spotify. We'll talk to you again next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.